Hello, I'm Jake Stone,
I'm Jesse Owens.
and we welcome you to another episode of Generally Particular, a production of the London Lyceum. Generally Particular is a show dedicated to discussing and reflecting on the whole Baptist story. We are a show by Baptists, about Baptists, and for Baptists, as well as Anglicans, Methodists, Presbyterians, and Lutherans. I'm a Calvinist Baptist, and Jesse is an Arminian Baptist. In the 17th and 18th centuries, we would have been known as a particular and general Baptist. And so we have brought those names together to form what we think is a fun show, hence, generally particular. We appreciate your patience with us as it's been a while since we have come to y'all, but we're back. November was a hectic, busy time. Jesse, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Just enjoying some good weather today in Gallatin, just north of Nashville. But it's been pretty cold earlier this week in Nashville and really cold in Louisville.
This week on Tuesday morning, when I got up to go into work, and I felt that wind blow on my face, and we had that wind chill at 13, I was pining for the Gulf of Mexico.
You were
I was
longing for that
longing.
Mississippi coast.
I was longing for the Gulf. But yeah, it's got up to 61 here today and sunny. So this has been our warmest day of the week. That's what's funny about how things have changed for me. 61 is a chilly day back home. You know, I used to wear long sleeves and jackets when it was only 60 degrees back home because that was cool. Now I'm in short sleeve polo at 60 degrees. You know, that's like, this is mild. And so it's funny how the body kind of changes. But we had definitely a very busy kind of month. Jesse did a great job. The last time we recorded was before Jesse and his brother were going to do the half marathon in Indianapolis, and they stopped by and saw me for a minute, and I gave them I gave Jesse's brother Josh a little taste of a Jake Stone Southern Seminary tour while he was up here. And
Yeah. Showed us around the library,
showed
the
the
updated library.
new library, and they went and did a great job in the race. And then Jesse was down hobnobbing at NerdCon, also known as ETS. And then there was people like me who have to work and study for Hebrew finals, and then spent most of this month sick. But here we are, back at it.
Yeah, I'll say we were suffering down there on that river walk in San Antonio.
Oh yeah.
It was tough.
Jesse was down there enjoying the desserts at Southern Seminary's reception. It's nice to get free food. Jesse does. I don't know what that's like, and I'm here. So, but I have to beg for it. So anyway, although I can say that next week we've all been a part of a lunch they're doing here on campus for people that work at the seminary. So that's very nice, and so I'm looking forward to that. So let's also say that we are recording this the Tuesday after 4th and 31. And, you know, for those of you who know me, you know that I love presidents and presidential history. And there's a saying from U.S. presidents that captures my emotions Saturday night. When Richard Nixon resigned the presidency and gave his farewell speech to the White House staff, which, by the way, you can YouTube. I think it's probably one of the best speeches a U.S. president has ever given. Richard Nixon was not an emotional man, and he starts crying when he talks about his mother. And if you watch that, you'll probably start crying too, because you start seeing him weep. But anyway, he has a line there, and it described my feelings. Richard Nixon said, "Only if you've been in the deepest valley can you ever know how magnificent it is to be on the highest mountain." And that was me Saturday night.
In one moment, I was tweeting, Jalen Milroe is having an absolute meltdown. And I think by the time that tweet had actually posted, 4th and 31, winning touchdown.
Well, I know that it was very quiet from my Auburn brethren. It still has been, but we'll be nice.
Shout out Garrett Walden.
Yeah. So great time, great Thanksgiving, and here we are back at it on Generally Particular in our series on Baptist bios. And today we are talking about William Kiffin. Now, William Kiffin is probably, I think, an argument can be made, the most important 17th century particular Baptist from the standpoint of his leadership and that he was almost the glue, in a sense, that kind of held the movement together. He's unusual for a couple of reasons. Number one, he lives a very long time. He's born in 1616 and he dies in 1701. So, I mean, that's just very rare for men of that time to live that long. And second of all, he had money. And that is unusual for the Baptist movement, especially at this period in time. And so,
and hey, where we come from, any period of time.
very true. I can say that I've never pastored a William Kiffin in the years that I served in pastoral ministry. So we need William Kiffins, and so we'll go ahead and say if you want to contribute to the London Lyceum, you don't have to be William Kiffin. We'll take anything. We'll take anything you got. So, Jesse, what do you know about William Kiffin? Or what stands out to you when you hear that name? Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, some of the things that you mentioned already, I think are unique in that the length of Kiffin's life is significant. And if you look at these influential figures that make a big difference, particularly in establishing movements, denominations, things like that, oftentimes there is a figure or two that lives significant periods of times. Now, I know some of our listeners won't be excited about this, but you think about someone like John Wesley. The establishment of the Methodist movement is in part, a large part, because of the influence of John and Charles Wesley. But Charles lives a long life, but John Wesley's life is extremely long, and that matters a lot. Some of the things that I think about related to Kiffin are not only the financial means he has, but the way that he uses those financial means. So one of my favorite accounts is sometime around 1660 in Aylesbury. There's a group of General Baptists who are in prison, and they seem to include a figure that we've talked about some on the show by the name of Thomas Monk. And we don't know, there seem to be two Thomas Monks at that time, maybe a father and a son. So we don't know if Thomas Monk is imprisoned, is the father or the son. But anyways, in Crosby's account of this, these General Baptists are in prison in Aylesbury, and a Thomas Monk, one of the two, goes to London, apparently has some connection with Kiffin, and Kiffin actually gets them out of prison. So there's a nice General Baptist, particular Baptist connection. Of course, we know that Charles II was very interested in Kiffin's large sum of money. He gave something like £10,000 to Charles II in the form of a loan. I think there's a funny line that goes along with that, Jake. What is that line? How does that go?
So the story, now, a lot of people think it's apocryphal, but hey, we go with the legends here. So that's what makes history fun. Charles II wanted a £40,000 loan and went to Kiffin, which tells you indeed the man was wealthy. And Kiffin said,
when you're loaning the king money, you're doing all right.
Yeah, and of that amount.
Yeah.
And Kiffin's wise. Money back. I mean, what are you going to do? Go and, sue the king? And so he said, I can't give you 40, but I can give you 10. And Kiffin is said to have replied, I just saved myself £30,000. That's a scene and words that I will never utter in my life because I'll never know what that
Mm.
that situation's like.
Yeah. Along with Kiffin's length of life, and I know this is something we'll discuss when you give us maybe a few more biographical details, but we think about longevity not only in life, but also in ministry. So
Yeah.
I think Kiffin pastored the same church for what, something like 60
Almost
years?
60 years, the church at Devonshire. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So that influence, not only for English particular Baptist in the 17th century, when you really kind of have the establishment of the particular Baptist in the 1640s and 50s, kind of just getting started, but then carrying that all the way through the end of the century. And then for that congregation, providing almost 6 decades of pastoral leadership is really incredible. Of course, he was obviously assisted by some other men during that time, but that's incredible to think about as well.
And William Kiffin rocked a sweet stash. He had a really nice mustache. And so to our audience, if you for the next generally particular, if you'd like to see Jesse Owens grow a mustache in the Kiffin form, let us know. I think that would be a fascinating experience to get to see. So
My wife might veto that, but we can
just
put it
one
out
day,
there see
just
what
one
happens.
day. Jesse will kind of look like a 1980s kind of person. Maybe he'll look like Tom Selleck, Magnum PI.
Yeah, he probably had better hair than I
Well,
do
he
too.
wore that cap thing, whatever it is. So, but on seriously, let me just go ahead and say really good resources. Kiffin, Knowles, and Keach by Michael Haken. This is a really great resource about these three men, and I recommend it as the best kind of one volume, quick read overview of particular Baptist in the 17th century, and then in volume one of the British Particular Baptist. Great chapter in here. You can see behind me the other. I mean, just go ahead and buy these volumes. You'll be glad that you did. It's just a great resource. Dr. Haken wrote the chapter on Kiffin, and kind of speaking to what Jesse said about like with Wesley and the Methodists, Dr. Haken said, unlike other Christian traditions, Baptists do not point back to one key individual theologian as their founder. Well, we do point to John the Baptist. Instead, their name recalls the rediscovery of certain elements of a vital New Testament ordinance. So, I mean, but Kiffin is a person, as Jesse talked about his long life and the theological connections. He's a man who signed the first London Baptist Confession in 1644. And he's one of the men who calls for the assembly in 1689 that will own the Second London Baptist Confession. So he's very unique in that sense of being connected to both documents. He's orphaned when he's 9. His parents both die from disease. He's apprenticed and is actually under the preaching of Puritans, and specifically, I know it always sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not. The Arminian Puritan John Goodwin is who was the preaching minister that was instrumental in Kiffin's conversion. And I know Jesse, always laughs when I say, because I mean most people think Puritan, they don't think that there can be such a thing as an Arminian Puritan, but
They need to read John Spur. I think his definition here is pretty helpful. Look up John Spur. Go
all
ahead.
right. Is that the English Puritans, 1603 to
Yeah,
1689?
yeah, yeah.
And so, so Kiffin is converted, and in this early conversion, he's brought into kind of the separatist movement, and then, he rejects though the Anglican arguments, the Church of England, and he'll write later in his life these words about his own kind of journey. He said, "quote After some time, I concluded that the safest way to follow the footsteps of the flock, namely that order laid down by Christ and his apostles and practiced by the primitive Christians in their times, which I found to be that after conversion, they were baptized, added to the church, and continued in the apostles' doctrine, fellowship, breaking of bread, and prayer, according to which I thought myself bound to be conformable." So what happens is he joins with the congregation that had been pastored by Samuel Eaton. Samuel Eaton had led a group out of the JLJ, Jacobs Lathrop Jesse Church. That was kind of where first separatist congregation in England, and where particular Baptists come out of. And so then Kiffin becomes very influential. I mean, he begins pastoring not long after that. And then, as Jesse has already alluded, he's there for nearly 6 decades. Let me just a couple more important things here in this early part. During the 1640s, we've got the English Civil War. There's a lot of stuff happening. The Westminster Confession is written. The debate in England is over. Are we going to be an Anglican church? Are we going to be a Presbyterian state church? And here are these, you've got the Congregationalist band with men like Thomas Goodwin. And then you've got these Baptists. Yes, these Baptists like Kiffin and John Spilsbury and others. And there was an arrangement made in 1645 that Cox, and that would be Benjamin Cox, Hansard Knowles, and William Kiffin were going to debate the Presbyterian Edmund Calamy the Elder on baptism, but it is canceled. That's the word I'm looking for. Canceled by the Lord Mayor of London because of the rumors that the Baptists were going to come with clubs and swords and all kinds of things to cause mischief and violence if their side would lose the debate. Folks, we know that's a lie because as Baptists, we don't lose debates.
And no love lost on this channel for Edmund Calamy and his presentation of Baptists. So.
Yes. And so, but then in this period, one of the best names ever given for someone is given to William Kiffin in 1659 in a publication, anonymously, of course. But Kiffin was called the, quote, ordained mufti of all heretics and sectaries. Now that's something to put on your tombstone right there.
Where is his tombstone, Jake?
Well, he's buried in Bun Hill Fields, and I've not made that pilgrimage, but Jesse has.
Yeah, we're going to make it one day. I'm telling you, there's going to be a generally particular tour. We're going to do English Baptist sites, and it's going to be great. So
my dream is to go to Bun Hill Fields with Popeyes. That's what I would love. Bring the two worlds together there.
And Bun Hill Fields is such a interesting experience. So John Owen is buried in Bun Hill Fields, as are tons of other well-known dissenters and other significant Baptists. But it also is right between two major streets, and it's weird. You're in this place that feels like here are all these people that you know about and you've read about and you revere and all of that. And people are sort of, cutting through there. It's almost a cut through between two major roads. They're trying to get to work or wherever else they're going. And here you are standing next to John Owen's grave or William Kiffin's grave, and everyone's just rushing by, trying to get to work.
It is a true statement that if you wanted to be anywhere on the planet at the second coming of Christ, that would be the place to be. Just to see the who's who when the dead shall rise first going. John Bunyan is there. Nehemiah Cox is there. Yes. So many great luminaries of the faith.
Hey, speaking of John Bunyan, so William Kiffin and John Bunyan are both buried in Bun Hill Fields, but they have a little bit of interaction too, right?
Yeah. So the interesting thing is even though Kiffin is as important of a figure compared to somebody like Benjamin Keach, he writes far less. There's not a lot of writings from Keach in his life. But probably the most important work that he publishes, and I've already quoted from it earlier when he talks about his own experience, is entitled A Sober Discourse of Right to Church Communion. And Kiffin and Bunyan exchange writings with each other because Bunyan is trying to, after Bunyan's period of being in prison, of being released, and trying to shepherd the Bedford congregation. Bunyan followed a model of really not wanting to make baptism an issue in polity. And what I mean by that was Bunyan embraced what we would call open membership. That is, that if you had been sprinkled, from Bunyan's point of view, you did not need to be immersed. That was acceptable baptism. He personally believed baptism was for believers only, by immersion, after conversion, but he was not willing to make that like a church practice. And of course, Kiffin, and most all, that's one reason why there's so much debate over the years about whether John Bunyan should be classified as a Baptist, because this view of open membership and open communion was such an anomaly in Baptist life. And so Kiffin really, Bunyan famously says, I don't want to make baptism a wall of division. And Kiffin deals with these issues and deals with the subject, and really in a way of, I would say, well done, lays the gauntlet down. And he makes this statement. He said, communion with all saints in all things is a desirable thing, and not the least part of that glory which will forever be enjoyed in heaven. And it would be a blessed thing if, while Christians differ in their light, the best knowing but in part, it might be made up by an increase of love. This would convince the world they were Christ's disciples indeed. But care must be had in the first place to observe the rules given by our great Lord, and to walk according to them, and not for communion's sake to leap over the order Jesus Christ hath prescribed in his word. And I think Kiffin's spot on there, that we do want communion, we do want love, we do want fellowship, but not at the expense of biblical polity. And one thing that's marked us as Baptists from the beginning is we have believed, yes, the New Testament prescribes a church polity. And Jesus Christ is the lawgiver and the head of the church, and he's the only person that has the right to change and amend. And he hasn't, and we can't. We best not. And so I think Kiffin, I appreciate Bunyan's heart, and I appreciate what he's wanting to do. But I think I'm Team Kiffin here.
Team Kiffin. All right. Well,
but I want to add this.
We had a feeling that's where you probably were going to land. But go ahead.
I want to add this, though, that's interesting. So those debates really are in the 1670s. And from all of our records, there was never a face-to-face encounter. If you read Michael Haken's book, Amidst Us Our Beloved Stands, he talks about this. Kiffin wanted to meet with Bunyan the next time Bunyan was in London. And Bunyan comes to London, leaves London, and then says, I was in town, but I didn't want to meet. And basically says, y'all are more learned than I am, which is, Kiffin was not trained in a theological education in a school either. And I think more or less, Bunyan was afraid, because it was not just going to be Kiffin, but others of the particular Baptist leaders in London. I think Bunyan was afraid they were going to gang up on him, in a sense, I think. But what is fascinating.
You could also see, though, how Bunyan might be slightly intimidated of a man of Kiffin's stature.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, sure. Yeah.
Formal education. I mean,
yeah, the tinkerer and the cloth merchant that the king is asking for loans from. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Bunyan's trying to not be in prison, and Kiffin's making loans to Charles II. So, yeah, you can still see it.
One quick side note, Kiffin is arrested 4 times in his life, but he's let out pretty fast, because it's basically one of those things of, they find out who he is, and so they don't keep him locked up very long. But what's interesting is when the 1689 Confession, or the Second London, there isn't anything in there definitive about the communion position. And there's an appendix that basically says we haven't made this a confessional article because there is a difference of opinion. At the General Assembly, there's only one church there that was open membership, open communion. That was the Broadmead Baptist Church from Bristol. So it does show that Kiffin, while he's very firm on where he stands and where he thinks a church should be, at least later, he was willing to say, but I won't make it a fellowship issue in like an associational context. And people are always kind of, I think, somewhat a little bit maybe surprised by this. It has always been American Baptist confessions that have been much stricter on who can take communion and membership than what's found in the British Baptist confessions of faith.
So Philadelphia goes a lot further than that, I assume.
No, the Philadelphia would stay the same, but in practice, they are much more guarded in the associational life. And I do think it's interesting when you start seeing abstracts written, condensed versions of the Philadelphia, that some of those abstracts are more definitive on who can partake than what's in the original confession itself as a whole.
Yeah, that's interesting. So he held the view pretty closely personally, debated it in print, but at an associational level allowed some latitude. At least that one church existed within the association.
Well, I think it's too. B.R. White basically says that because of the years of persecution and everything, they were at a point now they weren't at a luxury to kind of maybe tighten the windows, tighten the fence too much, or in that way. And I can see that. Were they right for that or not? That's a whole separate issue. But I think that they were, trying to seize, William and Mary had come to the throne. There's the Act of Toleration. But that does make me, but I do want to add that I think William Kiffin was a smooth political operator.
Yeah, and that's one thing we haven't talked about at all, is that he did have a lot of political involvement. He did serve as an MP, at least during the Protectorate, I think it was. So yeah, he understood business and he understood politics, and he was involved in those things. So I mean, I think that's he understood how things operated.
Yeah, he was really a supporter of Cromwell. He and some other London leaders write a letter to the Irish Baptists who were beginning to kind of be persuaded by the Fifth Monarchy movement, which was really kind of a very radical, militant, but millenarian. I think that's how you would say
millenarian,
it. Yeah. Kind of views on the Fifth Monarchy, Daniel 2, the kingdom coming in the world, and really Kiffin urges them to respect the authority of Cromwell and to remember, how we view ourselves to the civil magistrate. But it is interesting, in the 1650s, he is an MP. Of course, then Cromwell dies and his son is a weak ruler, and Charles is asked back the second to come to restore the monarchy. And he at first had promised religious toleration, but that doesn't happen because the Anglican Parliament is ready for revenge, essentially. But it's interesting that he ingratiates himself very well with Charles II. But then there's a lot of tragedy. When Charles II dies, James II takes over, and the illegitimate son of Charles, the Duke of, Monmouth. Is that right?
I think that's right.
Yeah, the Duke of Monmouth. Kind of leads a rebellion against James to take the throne, and Kiffin's grandsons are implicated in it. And Kiffin tries essentially to buy their freedom, and it doesn't work. And when they're sentenced to death, the magistrate presiding in effect says, and your grandfather should be joining you on the gallows too, with Kiffin sitting in there. Now, there was no proof that Kiffin had done anything illegal whatsoever, But yeah, he's a man that I've always found it fascinating that did what he could. And Jesse's already said this earlier. He used his wealth not to make himself a man of luxury. He used it in many ways to help dissenters, and I think use it to give a voice for them in a civil way that they would not have had anywhere else.
Yeah, he did some other things for orphans. I think he helped out some other French Protestants, and so yeah, so he used his money.
He also helped Baptist ministers in New England as well. They were a group that was being accused and charged with something in Boston. I think it's in the 1660s, and he fights to get them cleared, and he succeeds. So I mean, he really used his clout not for personal gain, but really as a servant, which I think is just very laudable.
He did have a pretty sweet get up though in that portrait, that painting of him.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, and I think again, that's why his longevity. I mean, I just think I mean, we're not there. We can't go back in time, but I wish I could. And you think about, I mean, he knew those early leaders. He knew John Spilsbury. He knew Benjamin Cox. He knew Henry Jesse. But then he knows Nehemiah Cox. He knows William Collins. He knows Benjamin Keach. I mean, we can kind of wrap up on the end here. Kiffin and Keach were good friends, close friends, but the hymn singing controversy will divide them.
Yeah.
And Kiffin does not agree with Keach, and Kiffin will call Keach out because Keach will make an error about, he accuses the First London Confession of not saying something, and it did. And Kiffin, and I'm just, paraphrasing it in Jake Stone here, Kiffin basically says, son, you weren't even alive. I was there. I signed it, and I know what it said. And so that it's kind of, sad to see that whole issue, how that even interrupted their friendship at the end.
Yeah, so there for the formation, basically, of with the First London Confession, through the Second London Confession, through the Glorious Revolution, all the way to the very end of the century, to the very beginning of the 18th century. And not only longevity of life, but longevity at just these key pivotal periods. So I mean, being 28 at the time, somewhere around there, of the First London, and then having basically the rest of his life through 1701. I mean, that's really important for the particular Baptists.
Yeah, and again, that's why I think you're right to say he, in a sense, is the glue that holds the generations together, and his influence helps preserve the movement through a lot of, if he had not had the wealth and station, he would not have been able to help imprison Baptists the way he was. Yeah. That gave him a voice and a door open for him to be able to plead the cause. I don't think it's a stretch at all to say it's almost a sense of a Daniel in that way, where you've got a man who represents the people of God in that sense, having a place in the king's court and being able to speak on their behalf.
Yeah, I think so. And to speak on behalf of my theological forebears, thank you, William Kiffin, for getting our folks out of that Aylesbury prison.
And on behalf of the descendants theologically of William Kiffin, you're welcome, Jesse. All right. Well, this has been our second installment of Baptist Bios. We hope you enjoy it. Don't forget, let us know if you want Jesse to be rocking the Tom Selleck Magnum PI and William Kiffin stash. I am not growing my hair out that long. I don't know if I'd wear that cap either, but if somebody wants to send me one of those caps, maybe I'd give it a shot if Jesse grows the stash. And well,
we've seen a Jake Stone Martin Luther. We need to see a Jake Stone William Kiffin.
Yeah. So I think our next time we will go then to, as we're thinking about this time period, moving into the second half of the 17th century and general Baptist life, we'll be looking at Thomas Grantham on our next episode. And so until then, friends, stay Baptist.
Stay Baptist.